Hello, 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 hello. Hi. Welcome to this very special edition of the Rebel Radio podcast. This is Long, or LT Primatron, or Evil Dr. Tran, or whichever nickname you prefer. This today I've been wanting to do for a long time. And what I wanted to do is do a special two-part special bonus episodes to celebrate the upcoming Godzilla King of the Monsters movie release coming out May 30th worldwide. And not only that, it's also the 65th anniversary of Godzilla. And I mentioned earlier that this is going to be a two-parter. And this first part today, we're going to do basically an overview of 10 of the worst Godzilla movies that were ever produced. And then we'll end on a high note in part 2, which was the 10 top Godzilla movies, at least to my personal preference. The other two co-hosts couldn't join me because they don't watch Godzilla movies at all. So they're not really familiar with the subject as much as I am. So I guess I'm the resident G fan. But yeah. But before we even get to the top or worst 10 Godzilla movies, I just want to talk to you about my personal connection to the crazy radioactive lizard that we've all come to know and love. Godzilla came out in the year of 1954. It was a very somber movie. And it's a pretty dark movie, too, because it covers the post-war psyche of the Japanese population and having the dubious honor as a country to be the only nation to have 2 nuclear weapons dropped on it kind of bears a interesting psychology among the populace. And in 1954... it was basically a couple years after the end of the American occupation forces of Japan that occupied Japan at the end of World War II. So in 1954, World War II, was still fresh in the minds of a lot of Japanese citizens during this year. So, combination of creative inspirations from Ray Harryhausen, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, and also partly inspired by King Kong stop motion feature from 1933. Tomoyuki Tanaka, the producer of the Godzilla series, came up with the idea while flying over the Pacific Ocean about creating Godzilla. So, a combination of those inspirations and him trying to pitch a movie and kind of on a, kind of a tired trip, but flying from the States over back to Japan. And I'm kind of rushing through the backstory of how Godzilla was created. Godzilla was filmed within a year or so from Tomoyuki Tanaka's idea of a monster with, deep connections to the nuclear weapons. Also, it's basically the height of the Cold War too, and there was an incident with a Japanese fishing boat that veered too closely to the Bikini nuclear testing, and the sailors got exposed to the radiation by the open air nuclear tests, and they were burned by the radiation. I mean, they weren't directly affected by the blast of the hydrogen nuclear tests, but the radiation reached them far enough or close enough to affect the health of the sailors, and that spurred a international incident from Japan, and naturally, they would complain and protest against the testing of atomic weapons in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. There's a historical connection as well to the creation of Godzilla, which I just kind of briefly overviewed. But in 1954, Godzilla came out and basically exploded onto the Japanese movie audience. And it eventually made its way over to the States, heavily edited and reshot with an American actor named Raymond Burr, as we all know. And we got Godzilla King of the Monsters, the original American release that came out under the, I believe, I don't remember the name of the producer, the American producer who brought it over. But yeah, it was released in Japan, and then American producer bought the rights to distribute it in the States, and I believe he turned a profit from it, even after reshooting and re-editing the movie. For American sensibilities, they definitely took out some of the darker nuclear Holocaust-esque undertones from the original Japanese cut in order to make it more appealing to the American audience. And the Godzilla King of the Monsters, the black and white movie, came out in 1955, and since then it has been featured in American cinemas in double billings and drive-through movie fare. I'm not quite sure, since I'm was born past that time. I came into Godzilla back in 1980 or 81, and the very first Godzilla movie that I ever watched was Godzilla versus Mothra, Mothra versus Godzilla, and the 1964 version. And it left a big impression on me. I remember Mothra dying in that movie and not being happy about it, and I knew I didn't like Godzilla because he was the villain of it, but I was definitely attracted to the franchise from the very beginning, since the impressionable age of 2 years old. I have a pretty far-reaching memory, even going back to that age. But I do remember Godzilla fighting the two Mothra larvae and losing. So that was my very first ever Godzilla movie, and still, it's one of my top 5 favorites. Kind of a little spoiler there for the next episode. But anyhow, and Godzilla is definitely the oldest film franchise out there. Yes, you have Star Wars, you have Star Trek, and you also have the Bond movies, but they're not as old as the Godzilla movies. I mean, we're talking about 65 years of cinema history here, and about 33 films, or 31 films if you're counting the anime trilogy. But anyhow, today we're going to focus on the 10 worst Godzilla movies. But before we get to that, I think I'm going to jump into some of the dishonorable mentions first. And I have 2 of them, and I'll go over them real quick. First honorable mention that I like to talk about is Son of Godzilla. As a kid back in middle school, it was one of the movies that my mom bought for me as a birthday present on VHS. But I remember I enjoyed it quite a bit, and it doesn't quite hold up now as an adult. Son of Godzilla, featured a goofy Godzilla suit that looked a little puffy, or I don't know. They tried to make Godzilla look friendlier, but it ended up looking kind of, I don't know, swollen looking. But and it had a weird looking baby Godzilla named Manila, and man, I don't know, he looks like a doughboy with gray complexion, and he does not strike to me as a spawn of Godzilla or anything. He looks like a Pillsbury doughboy with a tail, and not my favorite design at all for either monster suits. And the movie was kind of saddled with an okay bunch of monsters, like a couple of 3 giant praying mantises and a big giant spider as the main villain. But they did what they could. you could kind of tell that this movie and the movie before it, Ibra, the sea monster, which is a giant lobster or shrimp or whatever, these were set in the tropical settings, and they didn't have the budget to create miniature buildings, so they just set it in a tropical setting, so they could just install trees all over the place and make it a tropical landscape. But that's that's Toho during the times there in the waning years from the golden age of Godzilla movies. But yeah, Son of Godzilla's a dishonorable mention. Not quite cracking the 10 worst. Which I'm going to warn you ahead of time. It's going to be a little controversial, so you're going to scratch your head a bit. But anyways, my other dishonorable mention, and you've heard the main theme of this movie in the opening of this episode, and it's Godzilla Raids Again, or the second attack of Godzilla. It was the second ever Godzilla movie, filmed in black and white. You could tell by watching this film that this was a rush job, and generally, all of the monster action scenes are filmed in kind of slow motion, but for some reason, all of the monster action in this was filmed quick. It's like 3 times fast, so it looked a little unusual. The story was forgettable, and the ending was anticlimactic. I mean, we're just watching Godzilla getting buried under a mountain of ice, so that's about it. I've only watched this movie once, and really once was enough for me. Maybe they should have made it in the 10 worst Godzilla movie list, but it is what it is. I needed to mention this in my dishonorable mention. But this movie wasn't really as successful as the first movie, and thus Godzilla was kind of put on hiatus for a couple of years, for about 4 or 5 years, I think, until King Kong versus Godzilla came out in 1962. So he took a pretty long hiatus from Godzilla Raids Again. But okay, enough dilly-dallying. So, heading into number 10, Godzilla vs. Gigan. This movie came out March 12, 1972. The 70s were not kind to the Godzilla franchise, mainly because the economy overall in Japan was pretty bad, and that also affected the movie studios in Japan. So a lot of cost cutting was implemented. I guess some of the evidence that cost cutting showed up, particularly in this movie, was a lot of stock footage was used from previous movies. Whenever Hedorah, the three-headed monster, did his attack, you could see some of the footage was pulled from older Godzilla movies in order to fill in some screen time. But the overall plot of this movie is that basically aliens from another planet are wanting to invade Earth, and they use basically Gigan to do all their evil bidding. And Gigan is a giant cyborg monster or kaiju that looks like a chicken with arms for hooks and feet for hooks and a stomach with a buzzsaw. He is one of the cult fan favorites of the entire franchise. Based on that description, he doesn't sound like much, but when you see him in action, you'll see why he has a special place in a lot of fans' hearts. That's why this movie isn't any lower on the 10 worst list. And again, I'll have to warn you, some of these selections for 10 worst is pretty controversial, at least for other Godzilla fans. But if you're a casual, I'll try to do my best to explain why. But yeah, number 10, Godzilla vs. Gigan. Can't complain too much considering some of the shortcomings that the filmmakers had to deal with as far as budget cuts. And yeah, they did an admirable job considering. One of the biggest scenes that come out of the movie. Gigan basically making a bloody mess of Godzilla and Anguirus, his partner. And it was a pretty bloody movie for a Godzilla film. Some fans liked it. Other fans didn't like seeing blood coming out of Godzilla. But, it is what it is. I guess they try to spruce things up with a limited budget, and I guess that's one way of doing it. Okay, on to number 9. Now, this is the surprise part. Number 9, Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. This came out in December 14, 2002. The only reason why it didn't get any lower was the production was solid, and the design of the Mechagodzilla suit, as all fans and the movie called it, is Kiryu. He was one of the best looking Mechagodzillas to come out, and all I can say, the plot was, ho-hum, kind of average. The action was solid, not great, but, it used a mix of, special effects and, not special effects, but practical effects and CGI to a not so bad degree. Yeah, the basic plot of this movie is basically this is a reboot or a direct sequel to the 54 Godzilla movie, and they salvaged the bones of the original Godzilla and built a bionic suit over it, and they used this Mechagodzilla against the real Godzilla, and there's a fight. There's a malfunction that happens to Mechagodzilla when it hears the real Godzilla's roars, and it starts to attack the city. And yeah, it is what it is. And yeah, that's all I can say. Number 8, Godzilla Tokyo SOS. This came out on December 13th, 2003. Now, this is a direct sequel to the Godzilla against Mechagodzilla movie that was mentioned in the number 9 spot. The sequel was average at best and kind of a chore to get through. The special effects were average, so-so. Do we need another origin of Mothra? I mean, it's okay for casual fans who aren't familiar. I mean, it's a good movie for people who aren't familiar with the Godzilla franchise, but being a seasoned Godzilla fan who's seen it all, I mean, it's pretty average, in my opinion. I mean, I'm pretty familiar with the origins of Mothra, and then you have the two fairies, which are basically two women who have this telepathic connection to Mothra, and they pretty much hold the key to not controlling Mothra, but just understanding Mothra's motives and motivations and goals. And, it is what it is. Again, you're going to be hearing that a lot. But yeah, time to move on. Number 7. This was basically number 7, Godzilla 2000 Millennium. This movie came out December 11th, 1999. And as you have guessed from that year, this is a film that basically a reaction film to the 98 Godzilla movie. And the 98 Godzilla movie was so not in the spirit of Godzilla as a franchise, and the big giant iguana was nothing compared to the Japanese Godzilla, and it left a very sour taste in moviegoers' mouths. And in response, Toho decided to say, hey, that 98 Godzilla movie does not count. It's not part of the franchise. So in order to prove that, we are going to come out with a new Godzilla movie with traditional design, but modernized. It's a good looking Godzilla suit. I'll give them that. The Godzilla Millennium looked more menacing, more animalistic, and he has some of the best looking dorsal spikes on his back. They're colored purple. But, it kind of stops there as far as the good points. I mean, the plot of the film was forgettable. I mean, not that forgettable. It's average. It's basically about The movie is basically about a bunch of Godzilla chasers that tracks the movement of Godzilla and doesn't really want to see the creature destroyed. And some big brouhaha happens. An alien craft lands on Earth, and it becomes Orga, a monster. And it's an interesting alien monster design. But it had a dumb death, and the story was meh. I mean, come on. What kind of a monster tries to swallow Godzilla whole, knowing that Godzilla has atomic breath? And that's how the monster died. Trying to swallow Godzilla whole, and Godzilla kills it by releasing its atomic breath inside its gullet. So, anyways, moving on. Number 6, Godzilla vs. Hedorah. This movie came out July 24th, 1971. This one is bizarre. It had random bits of 2D animation thrown in. The fights are boring, unfortunately. I mean, most of the fights involve Godzilla waving his arms around threateningly at a giant blob of a monster named Hedorah, the smog monster. The movie is also known as Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster in the U.S. But this movie had a basic weird premise. I mean, the overall theme of it is, save the Earth. And what more could be said about this movie? Oh yeah, the movie is bizarre. I'll give you that, and it does get pretty graphic in a lot of scenes. You have people out and about, and Hedorah, the smog monster, can fly, so he can form into this big giant flying blob of toxic waste, and when it flies over people, they suffocate because of the toxic fumes it emits, and they turn to skeletons. Well, not turn into skeletons, but they melt. And, they kind of turn into skeletons from that. But it's a very bizarre movie. Again, I mentioned earlier, it had some bits of animation thrown in, an acid trip section in the club, and a weird song to accompany the whole movie. And the infamous Godzilla flying scene where Godzilla tucks his tail when Hedorah, the smog monster, tries to escape by flying away. Godzilla tucks his tail, tucks his tail, and uses his atomic breath as rocket propellant. And it's something to see. You have to watch it at least once in your life. A piece of infamous cinema history is Godzilla flying. Hey, but at least it was creative and ambitious, despite some of the budget cuts that the movie suffered during that time. All right, number 5. Now we're getting to the bottom of the barrel here. Godzilla vs. Megaguirus, December 16th, 2000. This story is basically about the anti-Godzilla group in the movie. They invent this gun that creates black holes, and this black hole actually is a portal to a different time period on Earth. So lo and behold, when they test fire the black hole weapon, an insect flies through, lays an egg, and basically from that egg, a giant bug monster comes out named Megaguirus. He looks like a giant mutated prehistoric dragonfly. And Megaguirus is actually a kind of an updated monster from the original Rodan movie. And it's Rodan, the movie itself, is a pretty good, solid, classic monster movie. If you ever have a chance to watch it, do it, because it's definitely a pretty unique movie. But anyways, didn't mean to go on a tangent. Godzilla vs. Megaguirus, kind of a ho-hum story, bug villain. I do like the score of the movie. It's a pretty good score. Yeah. Sorry. Kind of a brain fart. But anyhow, not much could be said about this movie. Moving on, number 4, Godzilla vs. Megalon. This came out March 17th, 1973. Surprise, another 70s Godzilla movie. This film was a gateway film for many Generation X Godzilla fans. They showed this movie a lot on television during that time, during the 80s. And I happened to be a kid during that time as well. So, surprise, surprise. It's a fun movie for younger kids, but as you grow older and you watch it again, it doesn't quite age as well as you get older. At least Megalon had some character to him. A big giant beetle monster with drills for hands, and it shoots napalm bombs out of his mouth, and I believe it shoots a energy ray from his antenna as well. Oh, and he can kind of dig and burrow himself underground as well. A pretty unique monster. He's another cult favorite monster. Gigan also makes an appearance as well in this movie. And and we can't forget Jet Jaguar. Yes, sir. Or ma'am's Jet Jaguar. Can't go on without mentioning the cyborg superhero that was going to be its own film, but producers figured, we should throw Godzilla in there just so we can make some money off this film. And I hope it did. And I do remember that this movie is notable for having a movie poster where it's Godzilla versus Megalon atop of the Twin Towers of New York City, the World Trade Center. But anyhow, it's a fun movie. It's a good gateway movie for the younger audience members out there. Maybe this shouldn't be so low, number 4, but it had some really annoying bits in the movie, like an annoying child character, and I don't know. I'm kind of a hater on Jet Jaguar. That's, I guess, part of the reason why it's on here. But anyways, Jet Jaguar is pretty useless in that movie. Anyway, don't hate on me. So that's just my personal opinion. Your taste may differ from mine, and I'll just leave it at that. Now we're going to dig to the bottom of the barrel here. Number 3, Godzilla from 1998, the American Godzilla movie. The notorious 98 Godzilla movie produced by Dean Devlin and directed by Roland Emmerich. And based, this movie, I have to admit, I did see it 3 times in the theater when it came out. And, it was made by a director who didn't understand or respect the film legacy of the franchise. The action was fun in some places. Until you reach the end of it, where it was basically a rehash of Jurassic Park's Raptor Kitchen climax. Too bad this film was called Godzilla instead of Iguana Monster Attacks New York, because I would have lived. I don't know. This is like one of the biggest disappointments of my life as far as being as a Godzilla fan. And anyhow, that Godzilla design was pretty bad. It didn't look like Godzilla at all. It looked like one of those giant iguanas that you see from the old school creature features from the 50s and 60s, like Journey to the Center of the Earth, where people just dressed live, actual iguanas in little costumes, and they made it look like that they were giant dinosaurs and stuff fighting. But Godzilla 98 was pretty disappointing. I mean, it had some good moments. The first part of it was good. It opened up a pretty good atmosphere. But some of the middle parts were kind of good. Some entertaining humor thrown in here and there, but it is what it is. It's one of the most hated Godzilla movies out there. Now for the big controversial number 2, and I hope at this point you don't stop the recording because this is what I put at number 2. It's actually a 3-way tie, and it's kind of cheating, but it is what it is. I'm putting the entire Godzilla anime trilogy here. Yes, I put it below Godzilla 98. I mean, the storytelling potential of a Godzilla anime is ripe for the picking, and they decided to go and put it. I don't know. It's just it's 3 movies, overly ambitious, muddled dialogue, and the trilogy tried to soar too high in its big ideas. The basic premise is it's set 30,000 years into the future after Godzilla attacks. It's a bunch of humans that went on an exodus, and they return far into the future, from their big spacecraft, and they try to recolonize Earth, and they find it's occupied by monsters, which is fine. The first movie of the trilogy was okay. It wasn't all that. I mean, I kind of fell asleep here and there because they try to wax philosophy into some of the story, and the dialogue becomes so preachy and over expository. They talk and talk and talk and talk. What is the meaning of life? What is our purpose in recolonizing Earth? Should we have Earth be our new home despite it being occupied by monsters? Is Godzilla a reckoning to human infallibility and the illusion of yada yada yada? Oh, come on. You're putting me to sleep. I mean, this is the kind of dialogue that you're hearing, and it's preachy, preachy, preachy. And they set up for 3 movies. They try to set up things and set up, and they talk about all these big ideas. And by the time the 3rd movie rolls around, nothing happens. Yes, the 3rd movie promises the appearance of King Hedorah, but what does he do the whole time? He comes back. He introduces himself. He comes from a dimensional black hole. He chomps down on Godzilla and basically freeze frame. He just bites Godzilla for about 10 minutes or so while the human characters philosophize about the morals of Godzilla's existence and yada yada yada, and poof, it ends. The movie ends. That's it. It's a disappointing trilogy. Hated it. I had more fun watching the Godzilla 98 film than I did watching these trilogies. This is I'll say this, the anime part 2. I mean, this is the first time I did not want to watch a Godzilla movie. I did not want to, see it. It felt like I had to drag myself to finish watching the trilogy. And that's a shame. I mean, it was quite a chore. But, that's number 2. Basically, the movie had so many lofty ideas and so much dialogue that it got too close to the sun and it burned out in a very bad way. People say it's a polarizing film. No, it's a very universally hated film among Godzilla fans. It's not polarizing at all. To make a movie polarizing, it has to be split almost 50-50 among the fan base, whether they loved it or they hated it, between the 2 camps. This movie is universally hated by most Godzilla fans. We're talking about 70-30 here. This is not polarizing. It's universally derided trilogy. And, I think the Godzilla 98 film has more fans compared to the Godzilla anime trilogy. It's already forgettable. People have already forgotten about it, So, I mean, what can you say about that? So, okay, that's my number 2. God, I hated those 3 films. Number 1, and this is going to be All Monsters Attack. This came out December 20th, 1969. That's what it's called in Japan. But here in the United States, it's called Godzilla on Monster Island. And it's a poorly made family movie with too many clips being used from previous movies. And it had a very annoying villain monster named Gabra. And the movie's about a kid who's being bullied. He's a latchkey kid, and he gets bullied, and he kind of escapes to this fantasy world where, he's friends with Manila, Godzilla's son, and they can talk to each other directly. And really, it's a showcase of fight scenes from previous Godzilla movies. It's a clip show, and this is basically the beginning of the, so-so to one of the worst Godzilla runs of Godzilla movies ever made. But yeah, that's my number one. All Monsters Attack, or Godzilla on Monster Island. That's number one. Or you can just flip it to number two and make the anime trilogy number one. Your choice, not mine. It's up to you. I want to hear comments, what you guys think. Tweet me at LT Prima, and we can have a nice lively discussion about my top 10 or worst 10 Godzilla movies. So I hope you enjoyed my commentary on the 10 worst Godzilla films. Quite a legacy to cover. One of my friends joked, who isn't a Godzilla fan, says, "Isn't all of the Godzilla movies considered worse?" Ha ha ha. Very funny. Let me slap you across the head. Bam! Smart Alec. Anyways. So I hope you guys are looking forward to my top 10 best Godzilla movies. Those are the top 10 that I highly recommend. And I'm going to leave you guys with this music piece from Son of Godzilla. And hopefully it'll put a smile on your face. It's a catchy tune the more you listen to it. But this is long. And I will see you guys next time on the main Rebel Radio episode. Goodbye. So long. Have fun. Talk to you guys later. And follow me at LT Prima or Rebel Radio Pod. And we'll see you later down the road. Do it!